All right, guys, happy Thursday and welcome into episode number 5 of BamaNews. I'm Simone Eli alongside Patrick Greenfield. Already week 5 of the college football season. Alabama getting back into SEC play this week against 12th ranked Ole Miss. The Tide host the Rebels at home, 2:30 kickoff on CBS, the SEC CBS game of the week. The Tide, the Rebels, a lot of history here. We have a lot to discuss when it comes to previewing this game, kind of the drama surrounding Lane Kiffin, as always, Patrick. But this is going to be a fun one to talk about today. We've been looking forward to getting into the thick of the SEC schedule to have a little bit more to talk about now that these FCS or group of 5 schools are kind of out of the way.
Absolutely. I'm very excited. This is the return of Lane Kiffin. First time he's been a head coach in Bryant-Denny since Rocky Block, 2009. So yeah. It's going to be pretty interesting. So
it's going to be good stuff for sure. And to help break it all down, we are joined by John Talty, the sports editor over at AL.com. Thanks so much for joining us, John. This is a game that you've been in this state for a long time. You understand the history of this game. We'll get to more about the 2014-15 matchup, but a lot comes with this one, a lot on the line for both sides. A huge opportunity is kind of the word that I'm thinking when I look at this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I still think we don't know that much about these two teams yet, which I think is why, we're excited about this game. A lot of great games around the SEC this week, but this is clearly, I think, the top game. And I think we'll know a lot more about both of these teams, after this game, because they both have had, a couple tests early on, but this is really the big one for both of them so far. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this game plays out. And I think we all expect a lot of points, which will be fun.
I agree. It'll be a good measuring stick for both programs. Let's take a look at the topics that we're going to discuss today. Of course, Lane Kiffin, the big one, the former Tide assistant. No assistant has ever beat Nick Saban. No former Saban assistant, that is. Will this be the one to do it? There's been a lot of discussion this week about it. Kiffin's taking a little bit of controversy as well from ESPN folks. We'll get to that as well. The Heisman hype with Bryce Young, Matt Corral, two guys kind of leading that situation in terms of who's going to be the Heisman winner at the end. And then, of course, the offense can it be stopped on either side. So we'll get to all of that. But let's begin with the Heisman hype, talking about Bryce Young and Matt Corral, two guys who have put up really big numbers so far. John, let's start with you. I feel like this is really a huge opportunity for these guys to separate themselves. Not that anyone's looking at the Heisman rankings when you're a player this early, but this is something that we get to talk about, is something that we can break down. And when you look at the numbers, they're pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think we've seen, there are guys who get off to hot starts and then they fade down the stretch. So I think, regardless as to what happens in this game, I don't think it's necessarily going to be the deciding factor in the Heisman. But I do think it's an early opportunity for both of these guys to, have kind of an early Heisman moment. Certainly I think there's even more to gain for Matt Corral, that if Ole Miss is able to, win this game, I think that will really, send Corral into another stratosphere, and I think make him by far the leading contender in terms of winning the Heisman. I think Bryce has looked really good. I think showed a lot of poise in that Florida game, and I think if he's able to kind of outduel another strong Heisman candidate in Corral, that'll certainly help his candidacy as well. So you almost wish this game was a little bit later in the season because there'll be more at stake, but I think it's certainly a good opportunity for both of these guys to have a big moment, to put up some big stats, and I'm sure for both of them to get a win to add to their candidacy.
Patrick, thoughts when you look at these two guys? Is there one that has more pressure than the other one, in your opinion?
I don't know about pressure, but I think, just like John said, if Matt Corral goes into Tuscaloosa and beats Alabama, his stock skyrockets. The way I take Bryce is it's a little bit like Karl Malone and Michael Jordan. There's a little bit of Bama fatigue that the media has. I think if Bryce Young does what he needs to do, he kind of just keeps on trekking along. Both the guys lead the Heisman odds by a large margin right now. But, if Bryce Young is Matt Corral leads his team in rushing touchdowns. He's not going to do that on Saturday. Bryce Young just needs to take care of business the entire year, and he'll see his name in the top 4.
Yeah, I think that for me, when it comes to Bryce Young, I believe in the Bama fatigue as well, Patrick. But I think that what John said earlier in the show, and that there's so many unknowns when it comes to this team, that it really has sparked a lot more interest with the program, and not so much like, oh, this is just the same old Bama. Because I think that people think that they are not necessarily weak, but there's an opportunity there for somebody to come in and kind of buck the tide a little bit and maybe beat them. I think so. In that regard, I think that Bama fatigue isn't as prominent as we've seen it in years past because there are so many new faces all throughout this roster on both sides.
like I said, Matt Corral obviously has 5 rushing touchdowns, so that's 16 total touchdowns. But he would have to pass for 6 touchdowns in Bryant-Denny Stadium just to match Bryce Young. I also think with the SEC, they're going to start playing each other and ripping it apart. All it takes is Spencer Rattler to have 3 500-yard games at Oklahoma for him to skyrocket to the top. And that's kind of what the Heisman is these days, right?
Yeah, John, when you look at the offensive numbers, and we've seen some weak spots for Bama a little bit defensively, how concerning is it the Tide trying to stop this Lane Kiffin offense that we know can score an incredible amount of points? I mean, right now, if you just look back at what they've done, 61, 54, 43, those are some pretty big numbers there from the Rebels the first 3 weeks.
And we saw this Ole Miss team, give Alabama fits last year, to the point that I think Nick Saban was almost confused about what he saw in that game based on how well they were able to respond to every kind of defensive adjustment that they made in that game. And so, like you said, Ole Miss has been cruising so far. And I think on the Alabama defensive side, we expected this to be the strength of the team, based on what they had returning and all they lost offensively. And I think that's still potentially what will be the case. But in that Florida game, which I think is really the only kind of marker that we have for this team, all the other games have been, pretty much worthless in terms of what we can take away from them. That defensive team struggled, and I think there were some unique circumstances there. I think it was incredibly hot, which obviously led to those guys looking gassed at the end, raucous environment, things like that. But there were some things that you saw defensively that would worry you. And I think they're just not as good up front as they have been in the past. They don't have that stud, guy in the middle, that stud, defensive end. I mean, Will Anderson's incredible for what he does, but they don't have as much as they have had in the past. So I think it's a big question mark for this game. Like I said, to kind of start, I think we'll know a lot more about this team after this game. And I think defensively, that's really the biggest part of it, that either they're going to do some great things against this defense and stop this offense and stop them a couple of times, or they're going to have another bad game like they did last year. And we're going to have even more questions about whether this defense is good enough for them to, to win it all.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add one point with the offense, the Ole Miss offense, because you hear about Matt Corral. You remember the high scoring. I'm just going to throw a stat up. Ole Miss is 4th in the nation in rushing, which obviously they haven't really played anybody too tough. Louisville, Tulane, which I guess is an SEC team, with Lane Kiffin. But if Alabama had a hard time stopping Florida and the RPO, this is going to be an interesting part of this game right here.
It's going to be an interesting part and definitely a crucial part. No doubt about that. I think there's something to be said, guys, when it comes to preparation and Lane Kiffin's preparation. They have had a week off, okay? And in my mind, I just feel like Lane Kiffin schemes so much to try to beat Nick Saban. I'm not going to say that he has some sort of obsession, but we see the guy on Twitter. He's always, joshing and stuff like that when it comes to his old boss. There is no question that he has been gearing up for this week 5 game for a long time now, coming off the bye week. I mean, who knows if there's going to be different wrinkles, but you got to imagine that this team, this Ole Miss team, is going to be as prepared as they possibly can be going into Tuscaloosa on Saturday afternoon.
I think he views it as potentially a career accomplishment. I think if he were to be the one to finally knock off Saban, I think he would view it as the biggest thing he's done in his career. And there was a great quote in this story today on ESPN where Saban says that Kiffin told him after last year's game that he basically had written down everything that Saban said he hated defending and used all of that against him. So Kiffin knows Saban pretty well. He knows what he doesn't like dealing with. And I totally agree with you, Simone. I think he is going to have a great scheme. He had a lot of time to work on it. I bet you he spent a lot of time in the offseason working on what he wanted to do against Alabama. Sure. This is the marking game for him. And I think he would love to be the guy to knock off Saban.
I think on the flip side of that, you have to give Saban credit for evolving over the last 5 years. Everybody talks about, Kiffin having his number or driving him crazy, but Saban has to be thinking about 2020 and then putting up 48 points on Alabama. It's not like he's not going to have a game plan himself to fight this one individual. I will say for Kiffin, he's obviously been humbled over the years. I think the Tennessee job, getting fired by the Raiders, getting left on the tarmac, getting left out of the national championship game. He's a different, more mature man. And I think that kind of shows, but you cannot discredit Saban's, ingenuity towards the game of football. And I think that's going to actually show on Saturday.
Yeah, I think that there's no question why Saban has been able to stay on top and progress in the way that he has for so long. And that's because he is changing with the times, whether that's recruiting, just getting to know guys, changing offensively or defensively. He has done what needs to take place to be successful on and off the field over the years. But Patrick, that's a great segue talking about Lane Kiffin and a little bit of a drama this week when it comes to some comments made by Michael Wilbon on ESPN. I have the quote here, but one of the things that he said is that, pretty much that Lane Kiffin is an embarrassment at some point, wherever, and Patrick has it here, calling him a clown, an embarrassment at multiple stops. Now, listen, I don't think anyone can be super proud of everything that they've done and said and whatever in their life. We all go back and think about things that we wish we could take back. But there is something to people reinventing themselves, people growing up. I mean, life experiences and whatever it may be. Guys, I really felt like this was kind of some random and unfair criticism a little bit towards Lane Kiffin myself.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's interesting, I think a day or two before Wilbon made his comments, our colleague Joe Goodman wrote a column, and I think the headline was, Lane Kiffin is a fox in a clown suit, which I think is a good way of kind of explaining like what Lane does. And I think what he gets a lot of attention for is much more thought out and purposeful than I think a lot of people give him credit for. Some people might think that, he's just this goofy guy mouthing off on Twitter. He does that for a reason, which is to generate attention around his program. In real life, I think, we've all been around him at different times. Like, he's actually pretty introverted and in some ways a little bit awkward. He's not this big boisterous personality. Like, this is very purposeful what he's doing. So, has he made mistakes? Absolutely. I think he still has probably some more growing up to do. I think that his initial response to the Wilbon comments I thought was perfect. And then following it up multiple times the next day, I think showed how much it bothered him, and maybe these comments hit a little closer to home than he would have liked. But I think he's come a long way since, the Tennessee days, from the Oakland Raider days, in which Al Davis basically called him the worst person he's ever dealt with. There was a lot of bad early on. I think he's grown up, and that's just, we all deal with that as we age and, have life experiences and things like that.
Another part about that you have to remember is, I want to say he was 31 when he had the Raiders job. Like, he was 5 years younger than me, being the head coach of an NFL team. He's actually has a winning record at every college that he's ever coached at. But I think that you have to give people second chances. I remember living out in Oregon when he got hired. I was not following the SEC, and he still was a big deal, taking shots at Steve Spurrier and Florida. He's not doing that anymore. Keyshawn Johnson was just saying he didn't even go on the show because he's just so focused on this week, possibly trying to get back to USC. That was something that was talked about, but I think you got to give people a second chance. And it's interesting to me that a national media member is just going to try and throw him under the bus without even knowing him.
And
go ahead, John.
No, just the last point I was going to make was, that, let's be honest, a lot of the national coverage of college football is very shallow. I don't think Michael Wilbon is watching a lot of college football week in and week out. I think he has shown that. So, like, I don't think he's exactly the expert on Lane Kiffin. I think it was an easy shot to take from his standpoint, but I don't think he's really paying close attention to what Lane's doing. No.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Lane Kiffin, both great points made by everyone here, but I think that he is the way that he is. He's different, and I think that that's okay. He doesn't have to be like his former boss to be good at what he does. Lane Kiffin plays a different role in college football than like a Nick Saban or any of the guys who are maybe a little more stoic in front of the media. This is a guy who young guys absolutely love to play for. And the reason that they do is because he can attract those guys. He kind of has that young vibe, but while also maturing throughout his career and growing up, he's the first to say that he's made mistakes or been through X, Y, and Z. And I think that makes him even more personable. He's a likable guy. And folks that, if people have their feathers ruffled over Lane Kiffin, I think it's more of a reflection of them than it is of Lane Kiffin, because he just is who he is. He plays the role that he needs to play. And I think it works to his benefit. And I think it will continue to work for his benefit at Ole Miss.
If I can add to that, a lot of national media or things you see out of this region, people love to dog Nick Saban for his attitude. Dare I say it? People love to dog Gus Malzahn. But players love to play for both of those guys. They would run through a wall. You heard that a lot after Gus got, people were going to defend him. Recruits are going to UCF. I think that's how Lane is viewed at Ole Miss and with young football players and with his offense. We just had Quinn Judkins on yesterday. He's going to play Ole Miss. People want to be in that offense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Simone, to your point, I think Lane's been really smart about taking things from Nick Saban's approach that can work under his personality, but not trying to do an exact copycat, which we've seen a lot of guys try to do and not have success with. And so I think Lane's been very open, like, I don't like some of the things coach does, and I'm not going to do them, but I picked up X, Y, Z, and I've incorporated that. And so I think it's a nice kind of hybrid approach of what works at Alabama, but also what works with Lane's own personality.
Going back to some previous matchups now between the Tide and the Rebels. Last year, obviously, a ton of points on the board. But also, when you look at the thorn in the side of Alabama back in the day, John, we were talking about this in the pre-show, just how that impacted the Alabama fan base, for one, was kind of entertaining, I guess, to see the reaction to those because it was slightly surprising. How do you feel like when you look back at those games, it has molded the Saban era during his time in Tuscaloosa?
Yeah, and not to keep talking about our colleagues here, but Mike Rodak had a good story about this today as well, just kind of how Ole Miss has helped Alabama evolve. But if you go back to 2012, Hugh Freeze's first year, they play Alabama, give Alabama some fits. They lose badly, but whatever. Leads to Nick Saban's famous, like, is this what we want football to be? And I think around that point, Saban really going up against Ole Miss saw the game is changing, and we're going to have to change with it if we're going to try to keep up. And so around that time, you start seeing Alabama recruit different kind of players, both offensively and defensively. You can't have the Terrence Cody's of the world anymore if you're trying to stop an Ole Miss, fastball offense. And so they had to recruit different kind of linebackers and all those different things. And then, we started seeing the offensive change. And that, of course, is really, kicked off when Lane Kiffin comes in 2014. And I think that's all kind of because of Ole Miss, what Hugh Freeze was doing at Ole Miss with this, really interesting offense of the no huddle, but also some pro concepts, some spread concepts. It was pretty unique in the SEC at that time. And now pretty much everybody does some version of it. So I think Ole Miss was really the school that made Nick Saban think differently. I think Auburn did to an extent as well. And, led to them having to evolve. And, we saw Alabama lose a couple of games because of it. And then now they've, look as much like those early Ole Miss teams as anybody.
I will say, those Ole Miss teams coached by Hugh Freeze, good coaches will find a way, regardless of what you think about them personally. Like a lot of people think about Lane Kiffin. Now you see Liberty doing well with Hugh Freeze. As far as the 2020 game, most of those players aren't around anymore. I don't actually think last year's game benefits Ole Miss as much as it does Alabama, because that gave Saban all the game tape he needed to kind of pick apart for Saturday. I don't know how it benefits Ole Miss in any way other than knowing that you almost beat Alabama.
I think that in and of itself is very beneficial. I think it gets the guys who did see that to believe. I think that so many teams go into a game against Alabama and they're already beat because of the name on the jersey that they're playing. So for Ole Miss to have even a taste of being competitive in that game, and more than a taste, I mean, to have about one, that's significant. I agree there's different personnel, but we're still talking about the same head coaches. We're still talking about the same programs. I mean, we're only 12 months removed from that game. And agree, again, the personnel is different, but don't count out what confidence can do in college football and college sports in general, but especially in the SEC.
I guess, I mean, that was at Ole Miss. That was, if I recall, there were fans in the stands, and it was one of the rowdier environments Alabama faced last year, even though it wasn't a full stadium. But they have confidence. They're the same 4-star recruits that, I mean, Alabama gets a little bit better at times, but like they all know each other. They played the game. I don't really think that confidence is going to be as big as the X's and O's, which Saban's going to have the advantage.
John, I want you to weigh in on this because I feel like guys who have gotten beat year after year after year, maybe this is like the coach's wife in me, because it's like changing the mentality of players is a hard thing to do. And it seems as though Lane Kiffin is having that impact on his guys. They're starting to believe that they can be a national contender. And I think there's something to be said about that.
No, I do agree with you. And I think if you look at Florida, I think that's a good example that Florida keeps getting closer and closer and closer. And I think, myself included, really counted Florida out in this, this game against Alabama, and they came, ready to play, and they, were able to, almost knock off Alabama. So I've talked to college coaches about this in the past. There are some coaches who believe that, like, because you know what Saban's going to do, you almost go in with a defeatist attitude, like, all right, like, I know I'm not going to be able to run the ball against Alabama, so I'm going to have to do this or do that, and almost, you're making yourself one-dimensional before the game even starts. And so I think Lane, has that confidence that I can score points against Saban. I know I can do it. I know that I can get these guys bought in to do it. So, yeah, I mean, Patrick, I think the X's and O's are obviously going to be a huge part of this. But I do think believing in the ability to win does, play a role for sure. And I think we've seen teams come in the past with defeatist attitudes, and they just get blown out.
Hey, let it be known, in show number 1, I had picked Ole Miss to beat Alabama. You
sticking with that?
I'm not sticking with it. I think it was more of no. And the reason is
script already 5 weeks in.
That's all good. It's all good. I feel all right picking Alabama to win. I think the reason was just kind of.
You want the credit if Ole Miss wins, but also if Alabama wins.
Yeah, that's exactly what he wants. He wants to be able to say, "Hey, I said that in week 1, but I went back on that in week 5 on Thursday before
this is gonna. I'm here right now. This is gonna live on the internet forever. I had picked Ole Miss. I think that was just kind of.
You stuck with that, bro. You can't go back on that. Stick with your.
We can't go back on that right now. Well, I was thinking it was kind of how I viewed the season. But now that you have this week and honestly, I think the beginning of the season, the Miami game, the Florida game, underperforming, and some of the other, the Mercer game, those are all beneficial. Those are all blessings in disguise for the Crimson Tide. I think that they're kind of picking up a little steam. It's at Bryant-Denny. He's pleading with the fans to get loud. I hope you guys go
Patrick,
and get loud.
We'll see. I disagree wholeheartedly. In my opinion, I picked Alabama to go undefeated, and I'm not going back on that because I'm going to stick with what I said. I'm not going to do this in week 5. Yeah. What I will say is now 5 weeks into the season, I'm more confident in Ole Miss's ability to be competitive than I was 5 weeks ago. I feel stronger about it being a more competitive game than I initially thought. I've gone the exact opposite in the way that you've gone.
All right. Well, the proof's in the pudding with
this, but do you feel more confident in where Ole Miss is measuring stick wise and their potential to pull off an upset? I'm not asking you to say it's going to be an upset, but in my opinion, my confidence in what Lane Kiffin is doing and what Matt Corral is producing, what this offense has done in the ground game, has only improved my thoughts on this Rebels team.
No, I agree. And honestly, I was shocked by the early betting line on this game because I thought it would have been a lot closer based on what we've seen from Ole Miss this year. I think from last year to this year, they've clearly improved. I think their defense, to this point has improved. I mean, we'll see what they do against Alabama. That'll be a big test. But, I think, one of the really, I think, interesting things that I think Patrick brought up there is that, and I agree with your theory in general, Patrick, that, there's been these close games where they haven't really played well, but, it's building towards something better. But at some point, either that switch is going to flip or it's not. And so, I buy into the Saban's been on them. He's pushing them to do more. And I think we're either going to see it in this Ole Miss game or we're going to realize Alabama's just a flawed team this year. And no matter what Saban says about trying to get them on board and they need to do more, it just hasn't happened. And so I think this will be a big test for, Will Anderson talked about after the Florida game how they needed to do more. It's either going to happen this game or it's not. And so I think that'll be a big thing to watch out for. But I think I've said this week. I think that this is the toughest game for Alabama regular season wise. I think if they get past this game, it's pretty easy cruising to the SEC championship game. So this is, to me, by far the toughest test they're going to face in the regular season.
Yeah. Well, the time is now.
Look at this dude calling me out. People are saying stick with the pick. Hey, things change over time.
Thank you, Jeff. No. You are the one that was hell-bent on making those picks in week 1. We got to do it. And I'm like, I don't want to do this, man. I don't want to do it. If we're going to do it, let's do it week by week. And you're like, nope, send me your picks. I'm like, all right, well, they were reigning national champs. They were undefeated last year. So I'm going to go undefeated again. You're the one that picked 2 losses. And by the way, who was that other loss? I want to make that on record, too.
Oh, the other loss was
who was that?
Auburn.
Okay, I just want to make sure because I'm making you stick with that one for sure. We'll revisit that sometime in November. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. Already week 5 of the college football season, believe it or not.
They won't cover the spread.
With the big SEC on the CBS game this week, of course, is number 1 Alabama hosting 12th ranked Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin, Nick Saban showdown. What more could you ask for? Bryce Young, Matt Corral. It's going to be a good one. I expect a lot of points on the board at Bryant-Denny Stadium. If you're going to the game, be safe, have fun, and we will see y'all next week. Thanks so much for tuning in.